Francisco, California. This is What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with Andy Lubson. Today, well, let's just quickly state that I owe you some dessert. We had made a
We've had a bet.
We had a bet.
You thought
It
Kavanaugh...
was, yeah, not... We had a little... a bet on just the Kavanaugh confirmation. It's a very sad news, actually, for me.
It's not good news. No, it's bad news.
So, yeah, but you just said in your last video that no matter what...
It was going to be bad news either way.
So,
but I won this time because I was right.
So, Kavanaugh was confirmed.
Which I knew was going to happen.
Yesterday. And
because the FBI investigation was a sham.
Yeah. So, I owe you, Andy.
You owe me a McDonald's frappe.
Oh, God, do not say to people that I owe you a McDonald's frappe, and now people aren't going to know that I'm going to pay into the McDonald's. I never buy McDonald's anything.
Now he's going to buy McDonald's.
I'm going to give you money, and then you do what you want with this money. Okay, let's focus like that.
All right.
I'm not contributing. I just bought some orange juice from a youth-led child.
Small capitalist.
Local,
very small,
organic.
actually. 3 feet high or something. Yeah.
All right, let's focus.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be again. Stop even believing what we're going to say. Actually, I don't think we tell the truth ever.
Yeah.
Bruce couldn't make it this week, and we really weren't sure what to do. I thought maybe we would cover the union movement. The UPS actually did it. We're not going to cover this, but just to tell you what provoked my idea was the UPS basically had a 54% no vote on their union contract. That means 54% of the members voted no on the contract.
What's UPS? First explain.
United Parcel Service, their union. It's the Teamsters, so the Teamsters had a 54% no vote, and the Teamsters went ahead and ratified the contract anyway because they said not enough people voted. So they basically just invalidated the vote altogether, which is a complete sham. So there's no democracy in our union movement, and hasn't been in quite some time.
And we should discuss unions a bit later.
We will.
So we'll get to
But you had an interesting one to talk about.
Yes, because today is the election for Brazilians, deciding on specifically mostly two polarizing figures, which we'll get into. And again, maybe we can do another bet, although it's kind of sad that the things we're betting on. But
yeah.
So Brazil is having an election, and they are in this very dramatic, election cycle where one candidate was a candidate from jail, another candidate was running his campaign from a hospital bed. So it's a very dramatic election. Yeah. And I sort of got interested, just to let you know why I pushed it, because I dated someone that was Brazilian many years ago, and they got me really into Brazil, and just I've always been entranced by Latin American politics, and I feel it's largely ignored by US media. So I thought we should cover a little something. From time to time we'll cover international things. Right. So who are the candidates that are... You're going to mention some centrists or some other alternate, like the other two other parties.
Ciro Gomez or something like that. But also I just want to say that while I do think covering Latin American politics is obviously important, I also think what the events that are taking place here are important because they represent the sort of political developments that are taking place around the world. The rise of the right in the context of either a rise of a left or the fall of a left, and the center parties kind of collapsing. This is happening across the globe. Why is it happening? And I think there's big things going on here. And also for me, this speaks to, these events speak to actually, they bear on what's likely to happen with AMLO in Mexico, because I feel like and there's a lot that you can learn about socialism and the possibility, can you take a slow evolutionary road to socialism? I think there's a lot of people hope they can. I think I don't believe you can, and I think there's lessons here in that. So this is not just about Latin America. This is actually about global politics being played out in Latin America and in Brazil. And obviously the United States is going to be involved. So I think this stuff is really important. I wasn't paying attention to it at all until you brought it up, and I was like, wait, I don't know this. But looking more into it, I actually think you picked a very important topic. So,
yeah, and there are 2 cycles to this election process, right? So right now, the election will be basically who is going to be the runner-ups.
Yeah, there's like 13 candidates.
But everyone is talking about mainly 2 candidates because they seem to be leading in the polls for both 2 polarized left and right-wing candidates. So let's name who they are.
Yeah.
And so there is Fernando Haddad, who is part of the Socialist Workers' Party.
Yeah.
Then there is Jair Bolsonaro, which is the right-wing candidate, and what the party is.
Social Liberal Party. PSL are its initials. PT for the Workers' Party.
And then there are the other ones that...
the only other person, there's a few other that I followed, but the only other person who's in the mix is this guy Ciro Gomez, who's part of the Democratic Labour Party. I can't remember what the initials are in Portuguese, but
Yeah. We need to brush up on our Portuguese.
yeah, but he's like 11% in the polls. I think Haddad is about 17%, and the right winger, how do you pronounce his last name?
Bolsonaro
is like 37%. So he's likely to win the first round.
And one other thing that we need to give in the backdrop of all this is that actually Fernando Haddad wasn't. Just to give some background information about Fernando Haddad, he is actually a replacement because there was Luis Ignacio da Silva, which Lula
Yeah.
is most commonly known, yes, and Haddad is replacing Lula because Lula is part of this 12-year corruption scandal that many of his party say that he was pinned on because they had already in 2016 ousted Dilma Rousseff, which because the Congress didn't like her, and they just wanted to take her down. Her opposition parties wanted to take her down, and then he was a legacy of Dilma Rousseff because they were part of the same party. And eventually, what happened was they pinned him to some corruption scandal, and it's chaotic. And they they put him on charges. He did an interview with Democracy Now, and he didn't believe he was going to go to jail. He went to jail, and he thought that everything will be cleared out. I'll put links to that. And the Supreme Court in Brazil said basically you cannot run for this candidacy because you're charged on corruption. So they replaced Fernando Haddad, and
they replaced Lula with
Fernando Haddad.
Yeah.
But really, the most interesting thing, Andy, is that everyone in Brazil sort of sees that Lula will just kind of lead through Haddad. Haddad's more like a puppet.
Haddad is a very unpopular politician, actually.
Yeah.
He was the mayor of Sao Paulo. He was completely ineffective there. He was very unpopular. He was very ineffective in Sao Paulo, and one of the few incumbents to ever actually not make it through the first round of his election, of his re-election. He didn't even make it to the first round. So the Haddad is basically running on the basis that he is Lula's guy. In fact, he has sweatshirts that say Lula on them, not his own name. Because he's basically a stand-in for Lula.
And all the campaign ads have Haddad there with Lula, and also with Lula's actual vice president. So it's like showing really I'm the one who is running, but this is the person who's running through me because I am. So, well,
not a very strong candidate though. Then, right? If you're just a puppet.
Yeah. But people trust it, and then they're also feeling like, what is the alternative?
Right. It is. Well, we'll talk about that. But it's clear that Lula is very popular still, despite the fact that I think
they decided to keep him because he is so popular to the end. Till the Supreme Court has said you cannot run anymore.
Yeah, and everyone believes that if Lula was running, he would win the elections outright. Although not with the majority that he won in 2003, which was when he first got elected. but I think there's, well, you can say more about what you think's going on.
All right. So, with that said, Brazil in the early 2000s was one of the leading nations on the international stage. And they had been leading even on climate change. They had been leading economically. They were up there with the big people, China, Russia, and everyone. They were leading. And then all of a sudden, the economic recession and everything, corruption had all of a sudden been surfaced, which people started blaming that, oh, well, this is, and the Brazilians started blaming that this basically, all of the corruption is the result of all of the corruption is the result of their economic recession and their downfall. It's a little complicated. I was reading that it's not just that, it's also that there was a lot of companies that the government had given subsidies, so there was a lot of bad investments, and it contributed similar to what we had here already. So it's not just the corruption in itself, it is also just that, when you have a capitalist society and you have bankers and you have big investors and companies leading, then playing with people's money, and you're just going to have an economic recession because you're not managing it in a way that is sustainable for everyone. You're managing it for a very small percentage of the people that are running the country. So Brazil was showing up in this way in the 2000s. All of a sudden you have this recession. They blame it on Rousseff, and people are looking for an alternative because they blame Lula's campaign and Haddad being part of that. I'll be exchanging those names together because they are one. And people are feeling like they have to go with Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is the far right. He is anti-trans. He had said so many things against trans folks. He is against most. He doesn't really care about sustaining any protections for minorities like women. No. He has said some really horrible things about he would not rape a certain woman because of their face to a congressperson. Right. And he is also
he said if his son, he'd rather his son be dead than be gay.
He also believes that the military should be involved.
More highly involved in society.
Very highly involved, and this is really
and he speaks fondly of the period in Brazil's history when there was a dictatorship.
Yes,
under military dictatorship which was only gone since 1988.
And we have to mention as well that the democracy in Brazil is very young. It has only been since 1960s where they started to have the military lessen their influence. Well, there's always influence in government with the military, but I'm saying lessen their position and their role in government. And Brazil is in this crisis where all of a sudden you have these favelas. Favelas are these hoods, these barrios, where we call them in Mexico, where they're largely ignored. And I feel as if the people are split. There's a quarter of the population of Brazil is undecided because they do not know. They feel like if they go with the Socialist Workers' Party, they feel like that is part of the contribution of our recession. But if they go with Bolsonaro, which a lot of people feel like they want to go to because he is upholding this iron fist, which actually, Andy, a lot of people in Latin America feel this way, that they feel that as if you need that iron fist approach, you need this traditional values because he is religious and everything. I want you to expand, but let me just finish here. So this iron fist approach that Bolsonaro is trying to bring up, and a lot of young, educated men are actually going for him. They feel they grew up in the 2000s where they felt that the economic stand for Brazil was good, and they want that, and they feel as if they go with the Socialist Workers' Party, well, that's a bunch of scandalous things, and what is the alternative? So we'll just go with Bolsonaro, which they don't like so much to have his military coup or this military sort of stand and position, but they feel he'll just largely ignore that, and they'll just sort of change the way that the economy is in Brazil. And what else I want to say about this before you have your turn? Because then you'll take over. I'm kidding. Okay, let me finish.
You're partly kidding.
No. Let me finish. Okay, yes. So, and one other thing is that I feel as if, oh God, I lost my train of thought. But I was reading as well that lost my
about
thoughts.
Bolsonaro.
Bolsonaro was saying something about him, and okay,
You'll probably come back to
I'll
it.
come back to it when I remember something. But I hope that this gives sort of a U.S. American context, because I feel like our audience largely is in the USA. So
Yeah.
it's sort of important to give sort of this backdrop in context of what is going on internationally.
Well, first thing to say is I saw a article by this guy from Bloomberg, an economist. They're not concerned at all about these elections. They know that either way, whatever happens, they're going to get what they want, which means the West has already felt like they've won and they've defeated Brazil. That's the first thing to know, is that as much as people in Brazil might worry about these elections, as much as we over here might look at these and wonder if the right-winger is going to be on the rise in Brazil, economists, mainstream economists are not. They feel like they're going to make money either way, and they've already essentially they've corralled, or they've lassoed down Brazil if it ever had any idea that it was going to be independent and run free of U.S. interests. Because at one point they did, Brazil. Brazil has, well, first had two strategies for trying to get out of this, and this is under the Lula's party, which was to be part of what's called BRICS, BRICS, a consortium of capitalist countries: China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa, which hoped to kind of form a bit of a bloc as a counterweight to U.S. That's number one. And number two, locally, Brazil was part of Mercosur. At least that's how it's pronounced in Spanish or something like that. In Portuguese, it's different. But Mercosur was like Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, and Venezuela, as part of a local consortium of capitalist countries getting together to try to create independence, again, from the United States. Largely financed on Venezuelan oil, really, which allowed them to be somewhat free of it. So that was the strategy. And the thing, and that strategy has been a failure. And of course, and that's the strategy of the Workers' Party. But let me first say that I don't think that the appetite for the Social Liberation Party is something that is some sort of, oh well, Latin American men like this. For years, the PSL has been like, they got like one position in government since 1994 or 99 when they first started, and other times they've had zero positions. They've won nothing. They've been 0.1% of the vote or something like that, or 1%.
Are you saying about my comment about how I said that these young males?
Well, I'm just saying that the appetite for this right winger is not some sort of historic legacy. There's a reason that people are going.
I see what you're saying.
They're going with them, and they're going with them because it's not just the corruption in the government, and there was corruption in the PT, largely on the order of corruption that you will find in any Brazilian government. It's one of the more corrupt governments. It has a very nasty history to it. So you could say maybe slightly the corruption was slightly less in the PT government than it was when other capitalist parties were running it, because the Workers' Party calls itself a socialist party, and it's supposed to stand up for something different. But they were able to be nailed for the same corruption because they were essentially trying to run capitalism better in order to fuel social services. So when Lula came to power, IMF basically said, well, you got to pay us back. And people were saying, no, don't pay him back. Screw the IMF. And they did. He did all the things that IMF said they needed to do in order to keep the Brazilian government solvent. Same with the Free Trade Area of Americas. A bunch of people said, get out of the Free Trade Area of Americas. Lula said, no, we're just going to we're going to find a better deal by forming this, we'll continue in our association with BRICS and our work with Mercosur, and we're going to really hold the United States accountable and get the best deal we can out of the Free Trade Area of Americas. Well, guess what? That didn't work either. So Lula, and what did he end up having to do? He ended up having to attack the landless movement when they were calling for agrarian reforms. He wasn't able to give it to them. He had to push them out of areas when they were calling for free land that was not to be used. And he pissed off, and like the left wing of his party, he made them all like, he expelled a bunch of people out of the left wing of their party. The Workers' Party has been a massive disappointment to people, and so it's not just their corruption; it's the fact that they ruled for 14 years, and didn't do anything significant in terms of what was really asked of them by the people who voted for them. They wanted to see major change. And so they're saying, we don't believe you. And this guy over here, and this is the story of the left over and over and over again. It's the story of Obama's broken promises. It's the story of Greek Syriza party's broken promises when challenging the IMF. Everyone's trying to do it while still be capitalist. And they always basically have to, they tell these major lies to workers, and we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that, and they break those promises, and workers get pissed. And workers say, screw you, and they go to somebody else, and they go to the right. And the left continues to do this over and over again. And every time they do it, they think, oh, well, maybe we'll give them part of what they want. It's like, no, they want it all, and you have to give it to them all, and you have to fight for it all. And if you don't, you're gonna be punished. And so this is what's happening: is people, just like Trump is as much in many ways a creation of the lost hope that Obama and the Democratic Party had, or like the fact that so many broken promises on the Democratic Party. This is what you're seeing here with what's the guy's name? The right winger. Bolsonaro he is popular right now and believed because he says crazy stuff, but people think, no, he's the kind of guy. That's the kind of attitude who's going to take down the establishment. That's the kind of guy who's going to push back against all these politicians who lie, whether they lie from the left or lie from the right or lie from the center. People believe this guy, and not just men, women believe this guy. Even though, he's a major sexist and will say all sorts of crazy stuff. But that's not the reason that he's going to that he's going to win the first round. He's going to win the first round is because people have been disgusted with being lied to over and over again. And the left has to stop lying to workers and thinking they can get away with it. Because when you do that, you basically push people into the fascists. That's what you do. And so there's a real lesson to be learned here. I'll say more later.
Well, first, I think it's interesting to note that he wasn't as popular until he got stabbed. First, because that made him
increased his popularity.
it increased his popularity because he was with his campaign and he was with his supporters, and all of a sudden he got stabbed. For some person that was mentally unstable, who knows what was the intention there? But it was covered all over the media. Yeah,
his popularity increased, but he was still winning in the polls even before that. He was still winning.
So he had all this light shined onto him, and then you have, but people did, we should also mention just a couple of weeks ago, there was all this massive protests against him. Women led massive protests against him because they don't want him. And unfortunately, a lot of people also feel they don't want Haddad or Lula because they see Venezuela as called a socialist country. And they think that they don't want to go to and this is what they also felt in Mexico, where they don't feel like AMLO's going to give us what Venezuela has, or Brazil is going to become what Venezuela is going through, because it's listed under socialist.
Are you saying it's because the Lula went too far? Like they're thinking, oh, Lula went too far, that's what you think?
No. I'm saying that there is this energy in Brazil. There is this people are feeling that they have to choose one or the other. And there is this massive protest against Bolsonaro.
Yeah.
But they also feel they have to vote then to go the opposite. This happens all over, like it was with us.
But the popularity, the Social Liberation Party came out of nowhere. His popularity is largely based on the lies and the disappointment people have over the expectations that the Workers' Party was going to deliver something really real change.
I agree.
And that Workers' Party was not just responsible for attacking the movements through the 20s. This is the same Workers' Party who brought them the Brazil World Cup, where they had to sweep people off the streets with the police. And also the movement around the Olympics, where they were going after, people were organizing to get free fares on the buses. And again, the PT party led the charge towards sweeping that stuff off the streets. So this is the left in power. When the left tries to be capitalist, it always loses because capitalism is of the right, and the left. The only alternative really, is revolution. That's it. So we'll talk about that more later.
Yeah. Except most people, when they think of the socialist movement, they think of Venezuela, unfortunately, And I'm not saying that, we've already discussed this, but that's a sentiment, because they look at Venezuela collapsing, and they think that Haddad or Lula, right, or even AMLO in Mexico, right, similar conversation, that they will lead them into this socialist ideology that is largely failing in Venezuela. When we have discussed, I don't know if you want to say anything about that first.
I guess I'll just say that people were really hoping that Lula was going to be different, that Lula was going to actually challenge the global powers, challenge the United States. And he was critical of the war in Iraq. He was critical of the unfair trade practices of the United States. But he didn't break from any of those institutions. And this is the things they expected to see. They wanted to see a guy who was going to actually fight back. And this is what they're seeing from this right-winger. Although he's not going to be the fighter, but he sounds like that. That's the same. It's that same, fighting spirit that they think is in Donald Trump, or what have you. That's the appeal. It's not the appeal of like, oh, we love the right, we love fascism, we love,
right.
Anti-gay. Although, unfortunately, because the left did not deliver on what it said, now we have essentially handed over the same population that was willing to listen to us and was hoping that we would do something when in power. When we don't, now they're going to listen to the right, and they're going to see what the right has to deliver, because people are fed up with lies, and the left has to stop lying. And the lies are twofold. I think we first lie to ourselves in thinking that we can slowly change capitalism and use capitalism to make it become nicer or make it more socialistic. And every time we do that, we get smashed. And the other lie is to workers, is to tell them, oh, we're going to deliver them something. We're going to give them something. So we lie to ourselves, and then we follow those lies to the workers, and we make ourselves unequipped to lead, unequipped to be listened to, because we don't know what the truth is. And the fact is that the only thing, and this to me is the story of this, the only way you will avoid the fascism that is essentially being built in the world right now, by virtue of the fact that the left is completely evaporating because it's not able to deliver. The only way we're going to avoid that is literally a working class socialist revolution. The thing that everyone is trying to avoid. The thing that they had in Russia that got defeated, the thing they almost had in Spain, the thing that they should have had in Chile, and it brought Pinochet instead when they were willing to fight for it. That is the thing that we must have in the United States, in Brazil, in Mexico. There is no slow evolutionary take over the state Bernie Sanders path to having a socialist revolution. There's only one path, and that's strikes, working class, general strikes, mass strikes, and global eruptions, global insurrections that lead to completely transforming these institutions into something, like not transforming them, smashing the existing institutions, and then whatever comes out of these strikes, becomes our revolutionary institutions of democracy. There's no other path. And that I feel is the lesson out of Brazil, out of what's going to be Mexico. Because look at AMLO. AMLO has been very reluctant to take down NAFTA. And that's exactly what Lula has been doing FTA. That's one of the reasons I think that NAFTA question was so important to me. It's one of the reasons why I know AMLO is going to probably go the same road as Lula, which is he's going to make a few changes, just like Lula did. Lula did a policy of no hunger, free from hunger campaign kind of thing, which had some success, but it just wasn't nearly enough to deal with the massive demands that exist in Brazil. And while it's under the IMF and the US basically pushing and pushing and pushing to squeeze their economy and force them to pay back debts, they should have basically said, no, we're not paying any of your debts back, forget you. And as for Lula going to prison, there were massive demonstrations to oppose his going to prison when he did. And Lula, I think, made a mistake when he agreed to go to prison. He should have been with the demonstrators and said, no, I'm not going to prison. You are the crooks, not me. Because I think Lula was kind of thrown under the bus with some of this stuff, although he oversaw a criminal enterprise with the PT, because the PT is now the Capitalist Party. They were running capitalism. But he never should have agreed to it. And now we again see the Brazilian workers having to pay the price for that. Because they were willing to defend him. They were shutting down highways. They had strikes.
They were. Yeah, it was massive before they put him in jail.
And he should have said, no, you're not going to take me alive. That's what Chavez said. That's what Chavez did. And that's what Lula should have done as well.
Oh, what happened to Chavez, though?
Well, he died of old age.
This is contentious. I think my people in Latin America. Well, Andy, I feel like a broken record.
Me too.
When I see the revolution, I'll hop onto it. And for now, I'm just dabbling here with this party, with the left party that is being voted. Same thing with the SF elections that are happening soon, right?
Well, let me just say something
Go
about,
ahead. Yeah.
maybe we can speculate on, because because I actually think, can you help me with the guy's name again, the right winger?
Bolsonaro.
I think Bolsonaro is going to win the first round, and Haddad is going to be second place, and they're going to run a runoff. But I think Haddad is going to form a link with the PT is going to form a coalition with the party, the Labor Party, basically the Democratic Labor Party, who Ciro Gomez is, and they might be able to then in the second round win by like 40% to something, right?
I see.
But here's the thing. Here's the deal. They're gonna once again, if you don't get the right winger this time, then the left is gonna win again. But it's gonna even be a more weak and tepid left that is again winning under context of, let's be clear. There's been 3 years of the deepest recession that Brazil has been in its history. 157 people are killed a day in Brazil, supposedly. There's obviously massive divide between rich and poor in that country, massive corruption, and massive greed, and it's a capitalist disaster land, and the PT is going to oversee that, and they're going to continue with these very milquetoast, deliver nothing, give nothing promises, which if you don't get the right wing in this election, you're going to get the right wing in the next election, because people are going to be even that much more pissed. So this is the reason why people should breathe no sigh of relief if the left wins this round, because it's only a matter of time. There is no left. There is no way for the left to have victory while winning office. That's what I'm going to say. The only victories they can have is the fight they have in the streets, and for winning, it's through whether it's for land, for fighting for land, fighting over strikes, over contracts, austerity. That's it. Whether you have to fight these Supreme Courts in this country right now, because we got that jackass Kavanaugh's in there, right? Or the Supreme Court there, which was basically clearly the Supreme Court that impeached Rafael Dilma.
It's Dilma Rousseff.
Dilma Rousseff. Okay, yeah, Dilma Rousseff. That the right was very much behind that. The United States was very much behind that.
Oh yeah.
In fact,
they tapped onto her.
Yes, they had wiretaps on her.
Surveillance here.
It was also found
out
out.
Under the Obama administration.
Exactly. Thank you.
I should say.
Yes, and the NSA has been investigating or has been looking into Petrobras. So the whole corruption scandal that's coming up around these politicians right now is being fed to them by the CIA and the NSA, because of the CIA has been looking into Petrobras. So this is all Western game, but you cannot beat them at their game. You cannot. Brazil thinks they can beat the U.S. at capitalism. You cannot. They will beat you. All right. They thought they were going to do it in conjunction with China. Well, the U.S. has taken on China. They're taking on Russia, and we cannot beat them at capitalism. We can only beat them at revolution. That's it. And every socialist that tries to beat the capitalists at their game gets destroyed, and workers end up becoming demoralized, and it pushes them to the right.
I've been after I've been feeling the sentiment recently about where our energies need to focus, because I feel like even just looking through my Facebook feed, some Brazilian friends talking about the elections, then other friends talking about the Kavanaugh hearings, and then coming in November, the voting.
Right.
All of the energy is into the voting.
Yes.
So, and we did also an episode on voting and what that looks
Around
like.
AMLO, because actually, yeah.
So,
and people need to pay attention to what's look at the articles that are coming out about what AMLO is doing. He is trying to do some stuff, but he's also making concessions. All this stuff is rich.
Unfortunately, I have to admit, I've seen it.
But I'm not even saying that's a criticism. It is worth people looking at this stuff while it happens. We learn lessons from following these people and seeing what happens. Not as a criticism, but as to see what works and what doesn't. Because AMLO is actually trying to do the thing, but again, he's going to be hemmed in. He's going to be hemmed in, and it's going to be the same story. The Mexican working class, 5 to 7 or 8 years from now, is going to find itself, forget AMLO. Well, we want the right winger. That's what they're going to say.
I feel it as if that, even in these other countries, because of the imperial country that we are in, like in the Arab Springs, they intervened. So even if something happened in Brazil, it is not convenient for this empire here in the USA where we are at. So I feel as if we here can do as work to work here in solidarity with workers globally, because then we can make these we can challenge our own government here from interfering with other workers that are happening.
Correct.
Because if you look at the Arab Springs, which is a recent revolution, or initiation of our revolution, and that was stopped because they had support and they were backed by U.S. forces, workers will then just always be undermined.
Right, and the Egyptian Arab Spring got derailed on elections as well, and this is why I say that
But it wasn't also just Egyptian. We should note that there were other.
Oh yeah, but I'm thinking more about. I am thinking most, but it goes beyond Egypt. It was like Tunisia and Syria, but a lot of these things got derailed by becoming electorally focused. And this is why I say that
Hillary Clinton promoted a lot.
Right, but this is why I say that the capitalist class is so happy at what's taking place right now, where everything, the entire discussion is being seen as everything gets decided in this November elections. It takes the discussion of how we're going to change the world out of the hands of workers where we really have power, which is actually in our own workplaces, in our own communities. That's where our real power exists. It does not exist in the ballot box. And it shows how much we are relying on the ballot box for change when we play this whole Democrat-Republican game and thinking of November as the most important, the November elections as the most important thing in our lifetime. It is not. And it decides nothing for workers that we care about. It will only decide which capitalist is going to mess us up locally and which capitalist is going to be responsible for overseeing the subduing of South America through war, through economic competition, IMF, World Bank, through loans and things like that. That's all that's going to be decided in November.
And just a little add-on to that is that I feel as if we are brainwashed to think that the only power that we have as workers is through the ballot.
Yes, yeah.
And that is where our energy, like I look at these Facebook posts and everyone is talking about Remember November.
Correct.
And yes, I personally do think people should vote, but there is more to voting. Right. And I feel we target this 1 month of the year, or June, right, for primaries. These like two I don't, there might be other months as well, but these primary 2 months in June and November that we focus solely on midterms or general elections, that it can seem that's why people get disillusioned, because you have these only 2 momentous time frames to be able to exert all of your energy in, which is really an enclosed, limited loop into what you can do so that you can cause any reform, really, because that's what it is. And I personally, just after this, it really hits me, Andy, like after these Kavanaugh hearings and then the confirmation from yesterday. Yeah.
And the fact that you have to buy me a frappe, which is just killing you.
Yes. You were supposed to buy me an ice cream if you didn't. Just, thinking that, if I may, to digress a little bit. I know that our topic is Brazil, but just to indulge me here, that Susan Collins, to believe that the senator from Maine would be able to, as a woman, be in solidarity with other women, is just a complete fraud.
Yes.
And, for her, she's just another pawn in the whole scheme, and she's not concerned whether she is a woman. She's concerned about her power. And she is actually quite good friends with the Bushes. So,
she's considered like a liberal conservative or some sort.
Yeah, and I just thought, just yesterday was pretty disheartening, I think, for this nation, for lots of people. So I think that today, and then following this later in the month, will also be another wave of disillusionment, but in a separate country, in Brazil. And we are just in this, like, every election is this dramatic crisis, cathartic, climatic
Yes.
very important
Yes.
election that everyone
Yes.
keeps saying the next one is the most important.
Yes.
But it only keeps the stakes higher
Yes.
because of the more money, the more interest groups, the more companies, the more lobbying, the more. And we're like in this drama suspense trying to keep up with just like, okay, I need to.
And meanwhile, capitalism is a moving target. There are forces in play here that are leading towards renewed nationalism. There are profits are harder to come by for for nations and for capitalists. So they compete with each other more, and they try to put tariffs against each other, and those fights around tariffs turn into actual military combats when the stakes get too high. So we don't have forever to figure this out. It's not just going to be this forever of being asleep at the wheel, thinking that the elections, days like November 9th are the most important days. We have to figure this out. I feel within our generation, like within a generation, or else capitalism will destroy our prospects for having civilization. I do think through global war, because the kinds of rise of nationalism we've seen before. It was seen prior to World War I, prior to World War II, and they're a result of the increased difficulties capitalism has the capitalists in their home nations in getting profits, so that they more and more rely on themselves as centers for protecting themselves, and then for going out and using their military to get new markets, to get new resources, or to compete for markets that other capitalists have. That is where this is headed. So we can't be asleep forever, because at some point there's going to be a deeper crisis that's going to lead to another world war that's going to make things it's not going to make it very tenable for us. So my hope is that within the next few years, people, instead of seeing November 9th as the most important day of people's political act, they actually see days like November 9th as the least important day. Not no important day, but the least. That the most important days of their political actions are what they decide to do when they go to work and they meet with their coworkers and they figure out what they're going to do about their boss, and they figure out, in trying to figure out what they're going to do about their boss, how do they link that fight up with the rest of their coworkers around the city. And that is the kind of politics that we're going to need to actually have a chance of building a new society. If we think we're going to get it from any Bernie Sanders-like kind of thing, Bernie Sanders or Lula or AMLO, we're constantly going to find ourselves disappointed, and that disappointment is going to come rubber banding back to us in the form of workers going for the right instead of to the left.
At some point as well, like I would like to have some of the general strikes that are happening across the country. If we can have people within any union, or with any, like if you talked about UPS and if they had any workers there that we can discuss with, I would like to also demonstrate that there are on the ground boots on the ground, as we can borrow those words from the government.
Yeah.
Real grassroots led, worker led. I think.
Well, that's the problem in many ways. That's the other side I want to talk about. But this is a more important topic that you did. Is things look really bad within the working class right now. The fact that probably that Teamster union is going to survive this really undemocratic thing they just did is an indication of how deeply pessimistic and how much despair there is among workers for their own institutions that are supposed to fight with them and for them. So things look really bad. I mean, I wish I could tell you about some story other than some story in history, but a story right now, there aren't many good stories to tell about workers fighting. This is going to have to change.
Well, let's not get too pessimistic, because
be very pessimistic. You should be very pessimistic.
I also want to emphasize that there was this red wave.
Okay, that's true.
So we shouldn't also this year was remarkable for teachers.
But unfortunately, it has become Remember in November. It has become Remember in November, and so But you're right. You are right that was a very important thing that has now been shunted into the elections.
It felt like occupying.
Yeah, and we have another chance of a round of this at some point in time, but it has to sustain itself, and it has to go much farther than just like a contract. It has to set the goal of taking control of its cities, taking control of the states, and ultimately taking control of the government. It must set that goal. It must set a revolutionary goal for itself, or else it will not be able to last and sustain itself.
Well, we'll make another bet for this.
what would be the bet?
I don't know.
I do think actually.
Let's wait until this primary one is over, and then we'll make.
My first call is I think that the left is going. I think they're going to win when they do the coalition. I do think they're going to win, but I don't think it's going to be good news in the second round.
Hope that the voices that are trying on the ground are not largely ignored. Which
we'll see.
All right.
Well, I guess we're done.
Yeah.
All right.
I think so.
It was a good idea. Thank you for bringing this up. No, it was.
It's current, and I feel like international politics are largely ignored.
Yeah, and people have to understand, reading about this stuff, reading about the Arab Spring, reading about what's going on in Latin America, reading what's going on in Africa. There are lessons for workers all over the place. This is not just staying informed. This is about finding out what's happening in struggles. And this is the only way, since nothing's happening in the United States except for election this and election that, it really is worth paying attention to these other countries and what's happening on the ground. It's not good news most of the time, but it's the only way we're going to learn lessons at this point until we get involved in our own struggles.
I would argue, though, as well, that we shouldn't just ignore any election either. Like, there should be this other energy that we have, but on the side, like, I'll just vote my candidates quickly and then continue to work in here.
You can have my ballot.
That's why you're going to give me your ballot. All right.
Like I'm going to get thrown in jail now.
But you're approving.
Yes.
Okay.
Take my ballot. Go vote for Democrat this and Democrat that.
I didn't say I was voting for. I'm talking about the measures that are important to me.
All right. Well, that's it for this week.
So we hope that we will have Bruce.
He said the 14th.
All right.
Yeah. So, and this is not it. All this up and down with Bruce. He's been willing to do it any time.
We canceled him.
We canceled him last time, and he couldn't make it this week. So every reason for him not being here is because of us, not because of him. So.
Or more so you.
Yeah, because.
All right. So we'll end it with that. Please, 4 things: share, rate us, review us, and subscribe to us. Largely, where iTunes is getting the most traffic.
Yes.
And we really appreciate
YouTube,
it. But you can definitely find us on YouTube, BitChute, Google Play, and Stitcher.
Yeah.
And that's it for now.
We'll see you next week.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.